right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I will kick it off for Bill and I from our end things. And tonight is going to be fairly open-ended to circle back on some things and answer any questions that feel are unaddressed, or maybe we'll take in some new thoughts that we can follow up on. But I just quickly want to run back through and remind anyone either in attendance now or who may view this meeting at a later date. All of the information associated with this draft that we've been working through is available online at the TalGov website. You can see the actual URL there, but you can access it through the growth management, like through the growth management homepage within the TalGov domain. So there we keep all of our, summary of the project, all of our video meetings, all the updated drafts, and a lot of other sort of response to comments and things like that. So please remember, if you want to follow up on anything or share any information with other parties who may be interested, all of the information can be accessed there. And certainly, if you have any other questions, you can reach out to Bill or myself, and we will direct you as needed. Real quick recap of the meetings we've had to date. We had our August 16th meeting was our first one. That's where we sort of did a run through of the entire draft at that time, as it was for the ordinance. And then I think at that time we said probably best served to break out each one of these three sections into their own meetings. So that's where we had our September 13th, September 20th, and October 4th meetings to run through each one of those thirds of the ordinance that we had so far. And then here we are October 18th to have this follow up to just review what we've addressed and any other questions that need to be discussed, you think. And again, reminder for anyone who is either here now or maybe watching this later, if you're curious what transpired in those previous meetings, you can go access them online, all of the meeting recordings. So with that, following these meetings, we're now on our third draft since we've started this outreach process, with the first one being presented at that initial meeting, and then the second one as we work through those different, I'll say, segment meetings, and then now here we are to see where we've landed so far. So with that, I'll pass it over to Bill to just give a little more detailed overview of what this draft presents, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, thanks, John. So in the third draft, it's really based on what we've heard from the community. I would always be surprised if there weren't a few places where we might have to respectfully agree to disagree with each other, and those will be hashed out during the public hearing process. That's normal. That's what public hearings are for. But I mean, really, I think the community kind of deserves to take a bow. I just did a very quick scan of the third draft of the ordinance today. I found 17 specific things that we changed, many of which were major things based directly on stakeholder feedback. So I think if I took a more thorough reading, my guess is it would probably be up around 20 to 25 things. But there have been substantial, significant revisions made through this process. So thank you for that. Last week, we did receive some additional feedback. I wanted to acknowledge that. ATN provided a letter last Thursday, also got some feedback from some individual citizens. I also wanted to let you know that, John and I have been so close to this ordinance for the last 4 or 5 months that it really felt to us like we needed to have a fresh set of eyes to do another kind of in-house internal planning review. So one of our colleagues, Kate Daniel, did that for us last week, and it's not really resulting in anything new. What we were really concerned about was consistency in wording, sort of housekeeping type stuff. So you'll see some changes along those lines coming out on the next draft. We were just wanting to make sure we had a nice tight ordinance. As far as public hearings, where we go after tonight, our plan is to submit the draft ordinance to the Planning Commission for initiation on November 2nd. then to the City Commission for introduction on December 8th. And then the Planning Commission consistency hearing would be January 4th. And the planned City Commission adoption hearing would be January 26th. So, nothing is, necessarily etched in marble, but we think that that's a very achievable schedule. And our plan is to start it here in a couple of weeks with initiation by the Planning Commission. And by the way, for those of you who may not know, the city code requires either the City Commission or the Planning Commission to initiate the ordinance process. So there has to be a formal, yes, proceed from the Planning Commission before we can proceed with public hearings. Oftentimes, by the way, you may not have the final version of the ordinance at the Planning Commission initiation. There might be some tweaks, done as it goes through the hearing process, but it would be, pretty close. That's it for me. I know that, again, ATN provided 11 comments. Kathy, I know there were more in your numbered list, but sometimes there were a couple that were repeats. For example, like on the raised planters for transparency. So when I took away the ones that were repeats, I counted 11 things. So we're very happy to talk about those. I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop sharing my screen just so that everybody can see each other a little bit better. But we're at your disposal. I'm guessing you might want to talk about some of the specifics. If you want, I can toss out the 11 things one by one and we can talk about those. What's the pleasure of everyone on the call? Well, not hearing a suggestion, I'm going to toss the things out one by one and we'll talk about those. Number one, I heard to not offer TDRs for non-native trees. That's easy. That was our intent. So we understand and agree. And by the way, it's stuff like that we asked our colleague Kate Daniel to sort of do a critical read of the ordinance, just for catches like that. It's like after you read something, I don't know, 15, 20 times, it's very hard sometimes to see the subtle details like that. So, but we agree with that one. The second one was and I'm going to paraphrase these, Kathy, forgive me, I'm not going to use your language exactly, but the second one was essentially to never allow the release of a conservation easement. I'm afraid we cannot support that. We feel like at the staff level, we don't think staff should have the authority to release a conservation easement. We think the community should be noticed of any potential release of a conservation easement. That's why we will recommend that it go to the Environmental Management Board. But for us to recommend an ordinance that ironclad would never allow a release, we don't feel that it's appropriate for us to sort of tie the hands of a future city commission, and with all of the potential unknown needs that might be faced in the future. So that's going to be one that, staff just respectfully disagrees with you on that one. We tried to kind of meet the community halfway though. One sec, Randy. We tried to meet the community halfway through the concept of taking it to the Environmental Management Board. We definitely don't think that should be done administratively by staff. And we think it's reasonable to have community notification. So that was it. What's up, Randy?
I was just wondering, I had a feeling that was not going to be a thing that was going to fly, but as I told you in an email, it's a sore topic for me because I've seen 2 conservation easements paved over. So I'm wondering, is there anything else you can do to tighten that so that the language says that it will only be released, in such X or Y circumstances? And I would be happy to work with you on some language like that. but just to tighten it up so it's not done frivolously or cavalierly. I'm also a little concerned about the environmental review board doing it because they're not elected. They're not accountable to any of us as voters. So I would actually almost rather see it go to the commission, because if they screw up, we can vote them out, you know.
I hear your comment. Let us think about it. I don't really have a feedback for you tonight.
I didn't expect you to, but just something to think about. And
Sure,
I'll
sure,
have
appreciate
to
that.
work with you on some tighter language.
Um,
It isn't absolute, but it's a little bit tighter.
Okay. Our motivation isn't because we think conservation easements would go away frivolously, but given the almost infinite number of unknowns that the community could face 10, 15, 25 years from now, it strikes us as being inappropriate to tie the hands of a future city commission in that way. There may truly, be good and valid reasons to do that. So we'll have to think about that. But thank you for the feedback.
Okay.
So any other comments? Okie dokie. Let's see. Someone had made the comment that the MMTD currently allows bonuses, which could translate into added height. And that in essence, we would have two separate programs that might add an extra floor going on simultaneously. One being the MMTD bonus and the other being the tree bonus. And the request was that staff consider not allowing them both to occur on the same project. I think that's something we're very willing to think about. Don't have a final answer for you tonight since that's a fairly new comment. But I think we appreciate where you're coming from, and there may be things we can do to try to address all or part of that. Let's see. Obviously, there was a great deal of discussion at prior meetings about, I think, a general sense that added height, even for something like tree preservation, appeared to not be supported for Midtown. We did add a map which exempts, I'd wager 90% of the parcels in Midtown. We are consciously, purposefully excluding parcels that front on Monroe Street. In staff's view, and again, this will just need to be one where we respectfully agree to disagree. In staff's view, if we are not going to consider increases of intensities on a major arterial like Monroe, where would we? So we think it is reasonable to accept the parcels that front on Monroe. Yeah, Randy, what's up?
I don't think that any of us were saying there shouldn't be more intensity on Monroe. What we were saying is that we have been promised a master plan that's supposed to come up with a cohesive design and function and an urban plan for Midtown. And if you exempt any part of it, then you potentially can really screw up the ability of the master plan to be effective. And so what we were trying to do was preserve the status quo to the extent that's possible until the master plan can be completed, which it may not be for another 2 or 3 years. So that was the concern, not trying to prevent that area from becoming more developed. I agree with you. Probably there will be more intensity on that street, but we'd like to see the master plan fit that into a whole instead of piecemeal development.
And I respect your view. I really do. It's just one that we're talking about the potential for one extra floor, and the staff recommendation will not include the parcels that front on Monroe. We think that's.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No,
I'm sorry.
By all means.
Finish what you were saying. I'm sorry.
That was pretty much it.
Oh, can I ask you if you're at liberty to reveal this, Was there some pushback from the development community on that? Were they unhappy with that, or is that something that staff came up with on its own?
I'm glad you raised that actually, because, and I'm just going to address this directly. All of the content of the glitch ordinance to date has been based on purely staff's ideas, I guess. The generation of these ideas has been staff purely. There has been no communication to us in any way, shape, or form from the development community. I think with the single exception of one suggestion that was made at these meetings to include floodplain management and the provision about stormwater. I mean, that was a terrific comment. It makes perfect sense to allow floodplain management in the same locations as stormwater management facilities. If there is any perception in the community that staff's recommendations are being shaped one way or the other by the development community, I would beg you to dismiss those from your minds. It's just simply not happening. The marching orders that staff received was to try to go find things that were broken and to recommend ways to fix them. That's what we've done. And to the very limited extent that there has been feedback from the business community to staff, it has occurred exclusively within the confines of these community meetings on these WebEx calls with nothing else. So
that was, Bill, that was not an accusation. I didn't want you to think that. It was just a question, because I mean, look, the neighborhood community, the environmental community, we've been very active, and we have, been very persistent, and we have submitted a lot of comments and feedback, and I would expect that the development community would do the same. I was just inquiring about whether that was something that they really wanted or whether that was staff generated, and it was not an accusation in any way.
Oh, and Randy, please believe me when I say that I didn't take it that way. My motivation for sharing what I shared wasn't necessarily directly because of what you said. But as you might imagine, I take an awful lot of phone calls, which we welcome, about this project and other projects. And that is somewhat of a theme from neighbors. So I just wanted to address it directly. The width and breadth of business community feedback to staff is 100% contained in these WebEx community meetings. So we hear it as you do.
Okay.
Alrighty. Marcia, did you have your hand up? Oh, Marcia, you might be muted.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a couple quick comments. You mentioned Monroe Street, and I understand that that's a major downtown artery, and but I would like for us somewhere to consider that there are still remaining some historic buildings downtown and on North Monroe Street, and the preservation or restoration of those buildings, I think, would be valuable in terms of creating the kind of uniqueness, special quality, ambiance, etc., that we all want downtown. And also, it might keep from arriving, hopefully unintentionally, but we seem to be arriving at lots of corridors and tall buildings that just create more and more of a tunnel or corridor effect on our streets, our main arteries, if you will. And I would really like to see what we could do to make, and I understand, I was at the previous glitch meetings, and I understand what we've done in terms of building heights and setbacks at certain heights and, all of that. Setbacks is not the right word, but when you go in.
Step back.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I get lost in the terminology sometimes. But so I do understand what we have discussed previously, but I just wanted to, I guess, put a plug in for maintaining the historic beauty that still remains downtown, and preserve it, restore it whenever possible, and just try to achieve an openness and a walkability and a inviting environment downtown to the largest extent possible.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ms. Turner. The next comment that I had gotten from the community was to essentially handle residential infill setbacks for residential homes on infill lots as being based on the smallest of the setbacks on either side and across the street. That's going to be one that, we have to balance that desire with the implementation. As you may remember, we are proposing to do most of that. We're proposing that at a true infill site where there's existing residential homes on all sides, just one vacant lot, that the new home's front yard setback would be based as being in between the front yard setbacks on each side. So if on the left side it's 20 feet and if on the right side it's 15 feet, the new home would have to be somewhere between that, somewhere between 15 and 20. There are some practical reasons that I'm happy to explain, but to include a lot across the street in that calculation as well, we can't trespass on someone's property to send a surveyor to have a survey done so that we can numerically confirm what the actual setback is. So we feel that the only way that we can practically get close to this idea is to base it on the actual setbacks on each side. So that's going to be one where, again, we'll have to agree to disagree. Yeah, Randy.
Can't you measure things by using aerial photogrammetry, or the property records? Usually contains a sketch that's got the dimensions. Can't you just do that? It doesn't seem to me you have to send a surveyor out.
Well, there's two questions there. With regard to GIS, our GIS gurus tell me, because I asked that very question, the act of digitizing multiple layers of, both property appraisers mapping that show the footprint of the house, along with aerial photography and all the other stuff, there's a swag there. It can be a swag of several feet sometimes. So it is not, unfortunately, exact. If it's a recent house, say 1970s forward, it's pretty much a slam dunk guarantee that we would have building permit records that would show the front yard setback. If it's an older house, say for example the one I'm sitting in, built in the 1950s, it's a toss-up, honestly, on whether or not the permitting records are available. And honestly, for that matter, I've seen some of the permit applications even from the 60s where things were just a lot looser then. The builder comes in to pull a permit, fills out a form, there's no site plan, so the quick answer to your question is that GIS maps are not accurate. I wish they were, and that if it's an older home, we stand a very good chance of not having permit records that will show the front yard setback.
What about just doing photogrammetry from the aerial views? They have, DOT has all those aerial maps, so you just look right at them and do the measurements.
Well, but you say do the measurement. You would have to measure the face of the house to a property line, and the property line is unknown on an aerial.
Oh, that's good. Well, I guess you don't know. I guess, yeah, that's the problem with trying to measure at the curb
Yeah,
too. Yeah.
to add to what Bill said, I was gonna say that's one that I think we definitely recognize the general desire of what wants to be achieved there. We're still trying to figure out the clearest and best path forward on that to make it happen.
So
So
if
we'll
the
keep looking at that.
my concern there was the language of the new ordinance, the proposed language about a range. And it was not clear to me the way it was written that if there was 15 feet between the property line and the neighbor's house, that there would be 15 feet on the new lot.
Well, it doesn't. It absolutely doesn't say that. What it does say is that if the house on the right has a front yard setback of 15 feet and the house on the left has a front yard setback of 20 feet, then the infill site would be 15 to 20, somewhere in that range.
You're just talking about from the curb to the house, the front setback?
Yeah, the front setback.
And it's technically
are not going to be also calibrated?
Randy, you broke up. I couldn't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. So then what you're saying is it's not the intention to make the side setbacks also calibrated to what exists.
We've never had side setbacks included in this. We've always focused on front.
I'll let Marcia speak for herself, but that's the big problem, as I understand it, with the quote infill house that was done on what street was that?
Terrace.
Yeah, is that it is so close to its side neighbors that it's really kind of horrifying. And
Mark, I'll call on you next, but let me interject this thought really quickly. Side yard setbacks, if they are ever to be addressed, my suggestion would be that they need to be addressed uniformly throughout an entire zoning district. We're essentially creating like an infill standard for front setbacks to try to address the massing from the perspective of the street. To do the same thing with side yard setbacks is really difficult from a implementation standpoint, just because it's private property. And there is, unless there's a building permit record, for that house on Terrace, for example, that I would wager was probably built in the 1940s or 50s. Unless there's a building permit record, we would have no way of knowing what the side yard setback is. And not only that, we can't trespass on private property to go have it surveyed. So we don't see a way of addressing side yard setbacks for the purposes of this exercise the way we think we can with front yard setbacks. Were that to be tackled, I think you need to address it, from the big picture of the entire zone. And Marshall, I'll call on you.
When you say from the entire zone, what are you meaning there?
Well, the neighborhood that you emailed us about with that question about the new home, that was RP1,
Right.
Residential Preservation 1. The Residential Preservation 1 calls for a front yard setback of 25 feet, but it's also in the NMTD, so that changes it to 15 feet. So, it's just the difference between dealing with front versus side setbacks is it's a lot easier to approximate the correct location for the front setback, because you at least have the ability of drawing lines on an aerial to establish the range of where the new house could sit. Even with the front yard setback, it's going to be difficult and a little bit of a challenge to empirically, scientifically know exactly what the setbacks are on each side. But we think we can still make it work from an implementation angle. The same is not true for the side yard setback.
So what Bill was saying essentially is, rather than do that on a case by case, lot by lot, it may be better suited to say, all right, well, maybe 5 feet isn't appropriate for all of RP1, maybe 10 feet is appropriate. And then you're still having a uniform standard to say, basically, that's what I think, it's, instead of doing it lot by lot and comparing it to neighboring properties.
Thank you, John. I concur with that thinking. I think the essence of residential preservation zoning is to protect the look, the character, the compatibility, and the historic nature in and of itself. And when I see infill in a neighborhood where the housing stock starts at late 30s, 40s, and then goes on up, and someone is able to build, and yes, it's 5 feet now, I understand that, but they build at 5 feet 2 inches, and then they put a porch and stairs on that side, and they are now right on top of the property line. And while they put a porch on the other side as well, but it only extends to 5 feet from the property line, but it's still a porch on the side, on the other side of the house, facing, a historic house that's existed, since the 1950s, probably 49. And it's just not, it just doesn't ring true. It doesn't seem to be consistent at all with residential preservation, just the essence of residential preservation. And it's not compatible with other homes on the street, other homes on the block, other homes in the neighborhood. And when someone then, on top of it being too close already based on the code, and then someone then can build a porch and a set of stairs on top of that, even closer, on top of actually the property line, it just gets ridiculous. Because, and I also want to recognize what you said about way back when this neighborhood was being built and established, they did do things looser, and things weren't quite as regulated, you might say. But we have to respect that, in many senses, that caused the inherent nature of the beauty, the character, and the historic essence of the neighborhood. It's not a cookie cutter. It's not a cookie cutter environment.
And Ms. Turner, I live in a 70-year-old house, so I'm on board with what you're saying. I completely understand that point. I think that's an asset. What I'm going to respectfully suggest to everybody on this point, I know that there is great eagerness. Randy, I promise you'll be next. I know there's great eagerness to do an update to the MMTD. I think that this issue is one that cuts across, large parts of the MMTD, and we're more or less at the 11th hour of this glitch ordinance. It's not to say that new things couldn't be added, but to some degree, we're on our 5th community meeting at this point, and it is a little difficult to add major new things in at this point. I think, we have collectively been able to do something good with this ordinance. So I would encourage us to bring this one in for a landing, but to save that thought about the unique nature of infill. Believe me, I understand your point. John understands your point. We all do. But I think that one would probably be better tackled through the MMTD update, so that we're not doing it, less comprehensively as it deserves to be looked at. Randy?
Well, let me just get in my 2 cents here about this before we leave to another topic. I think in some ways, I'm grateful for the front setback, but I think in some ways the side setbacks are actually the more important ones in residential neighborhoods, because I speak with some experience here. I live in an urban infill home, and the person who developed it got some sort of variance so that there isn't even 5 feet. And when we have our windows open, we hear everything that our neighbors on both sides are saying and doing. We can see in their windows. I mean, thank God we all really, really like each other, because if we didn't, it would be intolerable. But it it is a tremendous lack of privacy when you're that close to someone. So I feel like in residential, not in commercial, but in residential, that side setback is the more important one. I understand what you're saying about not being able to trespass, but I think there's ways to get around that, and I could suggest a few. One would be is if you had a yardstick that was long enough, you could stand on the property line and just extend it to see where it touches the other house. And that would take all of what, 30 seconds?
But Randy, you would not know where the property line is. That's my point.
Yes, you would, because the new lot being developed has to be surveyed. That's a prerequisite. So you've got a new survey, you've got the survey lines, you know exactly where the property line is, and they can't build until they get a survey, you know that. So you know where the survey line is, you stand there, you extend, not a cloth tape measure, but a hard, like the ones they used to have in classrooms, the yardstick, and you extend it and you just get your readout. And that literally takes 30 seconds. So I don't think I'm suggesting something that would make the building inspector's life, hugely onerous. It's just simple. And then you would know, okay, so in this neighborhood, the people on both sides have 15 feet. This one needs to have 15 feet. I just feel like that's making the residential neighborhood retain, as Marcia said, retain its historical character, and it doesn't end up looking like there's this one turd in the punch bowl, everything kind of matches. Pardon my language.
Well, I think we have been able to meet you most of the way with the front yard setback. I'm going to really encourage us to defer the side yard to the MMTD update so that it can be addressed more comprehensively. Just as far as best practices go, I'm not at all comfortable with sending someone out with a tape measure to establish side yard setbacks. That strikes me as being arbitrary and prone to mistake. We may just have to agree to disagree on that one. For the purposes of this project, though, let's go ahead and take care of the front yard setback. We hear you, though, on the unique nature of infill development, and I think that can more appropriately be addressed in the MMTD update. That would be staff's recommendation. Marcia, I think I saw your hand.
I just wanted to, not to belabor the fact, but people want to infill into these beautiful, older, historic downtown neighborhoods just because of their uniqueness, their character, etc. But if we do not set, I think, some better guardrails, if you will, then the uniqueness, the specialness, the historic look, the character is destroyed. And that's my soapbox salad for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Kathy, did I see your hand up? Okie doke. Let's see, the next two, I know pretty much everybody on the call said that they needed to leave at 7. So I'm going to skip through the next two fairly quickly. That was the comment about not allowing accessory uses in front yards if the house sits awkwardly where the front is not facing the front. That was one. The other was there seems to be very little support for doing raised planters. I don't have a staff position for you on those tonight, but we'll consider both. I saw the revised street tree planting priority. I think both the old and the new versions of that say essentially the same thing. I think we're always open to saying things, you know, more clearly, more concisely. So I didn't really see anything there that, you know, I found out of the ordinary. So, you know, I will say that I think whoever wrote that might have carried over some very, very old language, because there is a reference to compensating enhancements within the revised version that was sent over to us. And obviously that was not something that anybody seemed to support anymore.
Right.
Just an FYI. But you know, generally I thought the attempt at making that clearer made a lot of sense. You know, the next two about if finished floor is 3 feet above grade, there wasn't support for raised planters or building articulation as solutions. We'll think about that. Those are pretty standard approaches in other cities that I've worked for, but let us consider it. There wasn't support for changing the parking garage liner requirement. There are sometimes valid cases where a site makes sense for a parking garage, but there is not enough depth to wrap it with retail or office. So we need to think about that. I think you're going to see a staff recommendation, though, that retains some version of flexibility for parking garage liners. That's just something that, you know, we've seen too many sites that that has been a problem for, when it would have made perfect sense to use the site for that use. So, but I don't have a final answer for you tonight. What I was hoping to maybe talk with everyone a little more about was it seemed like a general desire to delay implementation of the multi-building option. I'd like to hear what the thinking was for that. That seemed to be something that was fairly supported initially. And, you know, obviously we've had a couple of examples of very large retail projects that the NMTD required the developer to push everything to the street. And this isn't meant as a critical statement. I mean, I completely understand it. But there have been a lot of community members that have resoundingly let us know how much they dislike those projects. This would fix that. So I'm curious sort of what the thought process is, and where the community might be with that issue. Anyone? Yeah, Kathy.
I guess, well, we kind of articulated our being open to more discussion about this one, but it, I guess this doesn't, it seems like you all have made a point about how the glitch ordinance is intended to, you know, make small fixes that would have a meaningful impact and make everyone's life better and easier. But in this case, it just doesn't, this seems to me to be moving beyond a small glitch in the ordinance to kind of creating 19 or 20 locations that would have something new that we haven't had before. That, to me, this goes far beyond talking about visiting the side setbacks. for a lot of parcels whose owners aren't even necessarily interested in it. And it's not clear to me that these, although they're on arterials, that this is something that would be good for the growth management of our city necessarily. So that's why I felt like personally, I was interested in hearing more discussion. I wasn't really reading this and thinking, what a great opportunity for everyone.
Well, a couple thoughts. One would be when you say 19 or 20, I think you're referring to that map that we produced at the community's request. And when we asked the GIS wizards to create that map for us, we asked them to base it on any site. I can't remember what the acreage cutoff was. I don't recall. It's slipping my mind.
8? I think it was 8 acres.
Yes, you're right. It was 8 acres. Any commercial site, 8 acres or bigger. Only one of those sites is presently vacant. Everything else is fully developed, I mean, completely with functioning, viable commercial development at present. So I think it would, just to make sure we're characterizing things correctly here, there aren't 19 or 20 sites that are waiting in the wings to go do this development pattern. There's one that's vacant that happens to be zoned for commercial. I'm not aware of any intention to develop. The entire motivation behind this multi-building idea, I mean, just very candidly, was put on our radar by the community over the last 5 years or so, where at least monthly, we have heard fairly direct feedback about how much certain projects are disliked. And the reason I think that they're disliked by the community is because large quantities of retail are pushed to the edge, to the street. And when that happens on an arterial, it's somewhat wishful thinking to think that you're going to make a 5-lane, arterial roadway suddenly walkable just because you push development, next to it. I guess I'm not sure where to go with this one from here. It surprised us a little bit just in view of sort of the passionate dislike of some projects. And honestly, too, as a pattern of development, this isn't, exotic. It's extremely common. This is generally how other communities have approached large retail development. And the question came up earlier about whether it was being pushed by any particular development interest. I can tell you it is not. This came about for 2 reasons. One is there is a project similar to this in Orlando where I grew up, and there's another one in Sacramento where I lived for a while, both of which had very, very good coffee shops at which I spent a lot of money buying coffee. And so I'm personally familiar with them. But then I couple that with the regular and frequent feedback that we've had over the last 5-6 years about certain projects in town that the community dislikes. So I don't know. I mean, we have a sort of a fully formed concept here with a lot of time that has gone into the development standards. We'll have to ponder what we do with this one. Given the problem that's been identified so passionately in the past by the community, my recommendation to our leadership will probably be to move this idea forward and let it be at least discussed at public hearings. I think it's too important to not have it discussed publicly. I mean, we're doing that now, but in a wider public forum. Oh, Kathy, you're muted.
I
Don't feel bad. I've spent half the pandemic muted.
I can see the need to discuss it in a wider forum, but I also, there's a couple things I think to be mindful of. One is that each time we meet, staff says, you know, these are ideas that we identified and we're only putting out there for, you know, public reaction. And so it's true, you ended up at someone's request spending a lot of time on this particular thing, but that of course in and of itself doesn't make it a good idea, nor does it make it something that the public wants, obviously, and maybe upon further exploration we'll feel differently. But there's one other thing I'd like to say, which was regarding this. You were saying, you know, we can't expect these major arterials to become appealing walking spaces, really. And that's the whole premise of MMTD, isn't it? I mean, that's why we need to just get rid of it, if that's the case. Because that's a purpose, to encourage, you know, multimodal transportation there.
I'm not advocating at all to get rid of it. I'm saying that this is an oversight in our view in the original version of the MMTD, and there's a fairly easy way to fix it. Honest to goodness, if this development pattern were built once in 5 years, I'd be overjoyed. I mean, this scale of project is not going to happen with great frequency, in my opinion. But if a large-scale retail project were to come forward and to be developed under our current set of regulations, very large amounts of square footage would be pushed to the street, which we have consistently been requested to not let that happen, just in the last 5 years. And you know, whenever in past meetings when I've said that we're here to generate ideas, I mean, I really meant that. I mean, I take that very seriously, and I hope that everybody sees with just, you know, the sheer scope of about 24 issues that you had a direct material substantial change in. You know, you have had a significant voice, a real substantive voice in shaping this. I think as we, you know, kind of approach the landing strip, you know, and near the end of a project, it's only very natural for us to have a handful of things that maybe we view differently. I think all that staff is saying is that, you know, this is one of those that, you know, we think that just by virtue of the sheer quantity of feedback that we've gotten in meeting after meeting, we feel like we'd be remiss if we didn't take this forward as part of the public discussion.
I'm going to have to bow out because I'm chairing the meeting for the Lafayette Park Neighborhood Association tonight, but I hope you all will keep going. And Kathy, are you going to stay with it or?
No, I have another commitment. I'll be late to our Lafayette Park meeting.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Bill. I always appreciate you know, and everyone. Okay, thank you. Good evening. Bye.
Yeah. And I don't mean to leave on a negative note. I truly do appreciate your responsiveness to our comments.
Oh, and know that I don't take it negative at all. I think it's good and healthy, you know, for us to have these conversations. And I also think it's perfectly natural to have a handful of them at the end of the process where, you know, maybe we might not get a perfect consensus, but that's just, you know, that's just part of the nature of the process. But I think when you look at about the 24 things that we've been able to make substantive changes on, you know, you guys have had a real impact here. So I hopefully you feel good about that.
Thank you very much. I must leave too.
You bet. Marcia, do I see your
Good night.
hand?
Yes, please. I must leave also, but ever for one parting shot, I wanted to see if there was any comparison in your mind between what you were talking about for multi-building developments. And I realize Governor's Square is not a multi-building development, but it's a mall. But say Governor Square was a multi-building development that included residential space as well as lots of different multi-use purpose space. The way that that was developed in terms of protecting it from the main artery, inroads in and out, safe access in and out, and protecting the trees, adding trees. Is that something that corresponds in any way to what we're talking about here? If it were different, if that makes any sense.
Well, you know, the issue of trees is dealt with by Chapter 5, and this ordinance has been focusing on 9 and 10, chapters 9 and 10. So this proposal for the multi-building feature doesn't have any new standard related to tree preservation. That's in Chapter 5. And when you start amending Chapter 5 with trees, you get into things like grading and stormwater management. And
Yeah,
um,
that's just a tangential kind of reference. I was just speaking to the general feel for how you come into it and then you're in it, but it's not on the main artery.
Yeah, and I think I understand correctly what you're asking, Marcia. Then I think the same general principle is what we would go for, where it is maybe instead of being a giant, single structure, is you're sort of creating your own internal roadway
Right.
network. So that people, there's still obviously be on a lot that big, there's gonna be a place where people got to park, but then you're walking within your own pedestrian scale
Uh-huh.
area. Yeah.
Right.
well, and yeah, I guess to pick up on what John just said, one of the requirements that we're proposing for this multi-building feature is to have dedicated areas set aside for public use. There's a public open space requirement, and the nature of the walkability of the project would be far in excess of what you would find if everything were sort of squished to the arterial.
Yeah. It
And
wasn't an exact comparable situation to bring up, but John, I think you kind of get what I'm talking about in terms of
and that's okay. It's fun to speculate of what Governor Square Mall could be, so I'm always here for that. But
yeah, me too.
but and then the other thing I would say in terms of like pedestrian movement and things like that is let's say comparing how Governor Square is versus what this sort of concept would be is, while the internal network that you create would obviously be safe, that would also ultimately connect out to your arterial road to where
Right.
if I'm walking down Appalachia Parkway, I can easily walk into this. Whereas now I'm walking into Governor Square to get to my destination where the building I'm going to, I'm walking across 2 acres of parking of asphalt, that
Mhm.
kind of thing.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so it ties it into the
I
broader
mean,
network.
yeah. It's not an exact kind of a comparison, but I did want to bring it up. So thank you for allowing me to do so, because I think there are some pieces and parts that are integral to both ideas.
Sure.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate John and Bill. Thank you so much for doing this for us. And I've gotten a lot out of it. And I'll meet you on MMTD regarding side setbacks.
Looking forward to it.
All right. Thank you so much. Good
Sure thing.
night.
Good night, Marcia.